What if that relentless chatter inside your head, the planning, the worrying, the judging, what if that's not actually you? What if it's a kind of phantom self that's actively blocking your access to true joy and peace? Welcome back to the deep dive.
Now, that thought isn't just some philosophical puzzle. It is the radical starting point for one of the most transformative spiritual texts published in the last century. Today, we are taking a really profound journey into the pages of a global phenomenon, the power of now, a guide to spiritual enlightenment. And before we get into it, I just want to say, if you love these deep dives into the world's best books, make sure you're subscribed to our channel, Audible Books. You really don't want to miss what we've got coming up. Now, our sources tell us that to truly grasp what we're diving into today, we have to be willing to leave the analytical mind and that false self, the ego, behind.
That's right. We're sort of trekking into what the author calls a significantly higher altitude, where the air is, lighter, and where true spiritual realization is possible for anyone. It doesn't matter what your background is. And the guide on this challenging journey is Eckhart Tolle. His own story, I think, provides such a powerful context for the transformation he describes.
It really does. I mean, he was born in Germany, spent his formative years there, then he graduates from the University of London. And what a lot of people find surprising is that he was a research scholar and a supervisor at Cambridge University.
Right. So a pinnacle of academic and intellectual rigor.
Exactly. He was deeply, deeply entrenched in the very world of the analytical mind that his later work would so fundamentally critique.
But then his life took this radical, irreversible turn, didn't it?
It did. At age 29, he was experiencing this just deep mental anguish, and he went through what he calls a profound spiritual transformation. His old identity, the one tied to his past, his academic work, his worries, it just dissolved.
And he didn't just jump into teaching right away, did he? He spent years just integrating this new state.
That's it. For several years, he wasn't writing, he wasn't teaching, he was just devoted to understanding and deepening that intense inward journey. And I think what makes his teaching so accessible is its independence. He's not aligned with any particular religion or tradition.
He's just distilling a simple message.
A simple universal message that you see from ancient masters across all cultures, that there is a way out of suffering and into peace. And it's accessible now.
And wow, did the market respond. The book became a #1 New York Times bestseller, sold millions of copies. It's been praised for its incredible clarity by people like Deepak Chopra. So our mission today is to distill that core discovery, that we are fundamentally not our mind, and that authentic power, real peace, and fulfillment, they're only found by completely surrendering to the inertia. Now, okay, let's unpack this. So the journey really starts with a definition, and the author tells us that enlightenment is simply the natural state of Ameria, a felt oneness with being. But if that's our natural state, our default, why has humanity spent thousands of years failing to find it? Why is it seen as this huge achievement?
Well, because the whole concept of enlightenment is so loaded with mental projections and, religious baggage, Tolle prefers a negative definition. He does what the Buddha did, basically.
Which was
He called it the end of suffering. The moment you give it a positive name, the mind just turns it into a future goal or a belief system, which, by definition, keeps you from the now.
I see.
The real obstacle to that felt oneness is immediate and it's internal, is our identification with the mind. And that identification makes thought compulsive. This incessant mental noise prevents any inner stillness, and it creates a false mind-made self-meter, the ego, which then casts this huge shadow of fear and anxiety and suffering over our whole lives.
That distinction, that the suffering is self-created through resistance, that's the hinge for the whole book. You hear people say it all the time, I just can't stop thinking. Until his point is, yes, and that inability is a dreadful affliction.
And what we're missing, it's illustrated so perfectly by that famous parable he uses right at the start of the book, the story of the beggar.
Oh yeah, it sets the stage so well. Remind us about that.
Okay, so picture a beggar who's been sitting by the side of a road for over 30 years. He has nothing except for this old box he uses as a seat. A stranger walks by and asks him, "What are you sitting on?"
And the beggar just dismisses it.
Right. "Oh, just an old box. It's empty." He's been sitting on it for decades, but never, ever thought to look inside. The stranger insists, though, maybe sensing something. So, reluctantly, the beggar pries open the lid, and the box is filled with gold coins.
He was literally sitting on his own treasure the whole time.
The whole time. And the profound interpretation is simply that Those of us who haven't found our true wealth, that radiant joy of being, that unshakable peace, we are all essentially spiritual beggars. Doesn't matter what's in your bank account.
So we're constantly looking outside for scraps of pleasure or
Not
validation.
exactly when the ultimate treasure is within. The whole spiritual path, then, is just making the radical choice to look inside the box you've been sitting on all along. It's realizing that this inner wealth, our connection to being, is infinitely greater than anything the world can give you.
This brings us to the terminology he uses for this inner reality. He calls it being. Why that word, and how is it different from the traditional concept of God?
He's very clear on this. For him, being is the eternal, ever-present one life that's beyond birth and death. It's not some external force. It is the innermost, invisible, indestructible essence deep inside every form, including you. And critically, it's accessible to you now as your deepest self.
But here's the catch for the mind, right? You can't think your way to it.
You can't grasp it mentally at all. It is a purely non-conceptual feeling realization that's only accessible when the mind is still and your attention is intensely anchored in the now.
So it's not something you could just read about and memorize.
Precisely, and that's exactly why he steps away from the word God. He argues that the word God has been emptied of its immense meaning through, millennia of misuse. The moment you say it, it often creates this closed mental image, a finite concept, often of some external, judging male entity which just reduces the infinite.
That makes a lot of sense. The mind always tries to turn the sacred into an object it can understand and control.
Yes. Tolle prefers being because it's an open concept. You can't form a mental image of it, nobody can claim to own it, and it's immediately accessible as that realization of I am that comes before I am this or I am that. It is the feeling of your own presence.
Okay, so the door to being is blocked by the mind, which for most of us has become this relentless, compulsive activity. But we're taught, culturally, that thinking is our greatest achievement. Descartes famously said, I think, therefore I am. Tolle seems to be saying this is the fundamental error of modern humanity.
He calls it the basic error. The compulsive thinker, which he says is almost everyone, equates thinking with identity. This nonstop mental noise creates this insanely complex, fragmented inner world, which then gets reflected as continuous conflict in the outer world. Thinking in this compulsive state has literally become a disease.
But hold on, if 80 to 90% of our thinking is repetitive and useless, how do we balance that with the fact that thinking built civilization, it solved complex medical problems, it sent us to space? Where's the line between compulsive thinking and just using your mind rightly?
That is the essential question. The mind is a superb instrument, maybe the finest tool in the universe, when it is used rightly. The dysfunction starts when you don't use it at all, when it uses you.
The instrument has taken over.
The instrument has taken over, and because we identify with it, we mistake that compulsive voice for who we are. Tolle says we're essentially living in a state of collective, low-grade insanity, and these destructive thought patterns have caused just eons of suffering and violence.
They were basically addicted to our own thoughts.
Yeah. It's absolutely an addiction. We are addicted because we get our sense of self, that false identity, the ego from the content and activity of our minds. The moment you ask yourself, who am I? Your mind starts pulling up memories, history, your status, opinions, this mental image, this phantom self. The ego has to be constantly energized by continuous thinking. If you stop thinking, the ego starts to starve.
And this forces the ego to completely ignore the present moment.
Completely.
Yeah.
The ego sees the now as a threat because it only exists in psychological time. It's obsessed with keeping the past alive, that bank of grievances, achievements, identities, because without the past, the ego doesn't know who it is, and then it constantly projects into the future for salvation.
Right, that classic thought, one day when I get this job or find the right partner or pay off the house, then I will be okay. Then I'll be at peace.
That's it. Even when the ego seems concerned with the present, it's only looking at it as a means to a future end. It's never enough. The ego doesn't want fulfillment to be now. It needs to delay fulfillment so it can maintain its search and therefore maintain its identity.
Which explains that constant sense of unease. It's terrifying. But Tolle raises this idea that this dominance of the compulsive mind is just a temporary stage in the evolution of consciousness. And he suggests humanity has to move to the next stage urgently, or we risk being destroyed by this monster the mind has become.
It connects directly to the idea that the mind is superb at attack and defense, but it's terrible at peace and creation. When you look at global conflict, the environmental crisis, the insanity of endless consumption, Tolle argues these are all just external manifestations of these destructive mind patterns running wild. Breaking this pattern isn't just about spiritual growth, it's literally an evolutionary imperative for the survival of our species.
So if the mind is this survival machine and the ego is its product, and they both thrive on psychological time, the past and the future, then the only way out has to be through the door of the now.
Time and mind are inseparable. You can think of psychological time as this accumulated baggage of the mind. So an interest in your preoccupation with the past and future inevitably means a corresponding increase in suffering and anxiety.
I love that analogy he uses of the oak tree or the eagle. If Earth had no humans, the question, what time is it, would be totally meaningless to them. They just live in the immediacy of the now. But we've accumulated this heavy burden of time in our minds, and it completely obscures the infinite potential of being that's always right here.
And that's why the solution isn't to fight the mind. That just creates more mind, more conflict. The good news is you don't have to tackle this huge monolithic mind head on. You just need to start creating little gaps in the mind stream. And Tolle offers these really practical, actionable methods that are the essence of meditation, but stripped of all the religious ritual.
The first one, and it's the most foundational, is watching the thinker. How? How exactly do you watch a thought?
You just step back. You listen to the voice in your head as if it belongs to a stranger. You become the witness of the thought. And when you listen, you become aware not just of the thought's content, the worry, the judgment, the plan, but also of yourself as the quiet, spacious awareness behind it all. This immediately brings in a new dimension of consciousness, presence.
That sounds like a really powerful redirection of energy.
It is. The thought then loses its power over you, and it subsides pretty quickly because you're no longer energizing that compulsive pattern through identification. You have that realization, that's just a thought, it's not me. And that's the beginning of the end of that involuntary, compulsory stream of thinking.
And when a thought subsides, we get a gap, a little moment of stillness.
Precisely. At first, the gaps are short, maybe just a few seconds, but they gradually get longer. And in those gaps, you feel this inner stillness, an intense quiet, and a sort of subtle joy. The joy of being. And that feeling of your own presence becomes so intense that the content of your thoughts or the dramas of the world, they just become relatively insignificant. It's pure consciousness tasting itself.
The second way in is through the simplest activities of daily life, the routine activity practice.
Yes, and this is perfect for anyone who thinks, I don't have time to sit on a cushion for an hour. You just take any routine activity that is normally just a means to an end, walking up the stairs, washing your hands, waiting at a stoplight, and you give it your fullest attention. You make it an end in itself.
So for example, if I'm washing my hands, normally my mind is planning the rest of my day or replaying an argument. If I apply this practice, what am I actually doing?
You are bringing your consciousness fully into the sensory experience. Feel the temperature of the water, notice the texture of the soap, listen to the sound of the faucet. Every time your mind tries to pull you away to the past or the future, you just gently bring 100% of your attention back to the action. You enter this highly alert, aware state without all the mental labeling. And when you do that, you realize the staircase isn't just a way to get to the third floor. The staircase is the purpose of that moment.
This practice seems to lead directly into dissolving pain in the present moment. If we realize the mind is creating most of our suffering through resistance, how do we stop that resistance when things genuinely feel terrible?
The greater part of human pain is self-created through non-acceptance of what is. Resistance on the thought level is judgment. On the emotional level, it's negativity. The intensity of your pain directly correlates with your degree of identification with that resisting, judging mind.
But what if I'm in a job I truly hate, or I feel stuck in a miserable situation? My mind is just screaming that this moment is unacceptable. How do I practice acceptance without just becoming a passive victim?
And that's where the profound clarity of Tolle's teaching comes in. Acceptance does not mean passive resignation, not at all. When the present moment is unacceptable, you first observe how your mind is labeling it, how this continuous judgment creates unhappiness. By watching that process, you step out of the resistance pattern. You allow the present moment to just be. You say an inner yes to the reality of the now.
And then what happens?
Then, and only then, can you take effective action. The key is incredibly simple. Accept, then act. You work with the moment, not against it. If you hate your job, you first accept the reality that you are currently there. From that place of non-resistance, your next action, whether it's looking for a new job or talking to your boss or quitting, it will be infused with clarity and power, not with the negativity that would otherwise pollute the whole process. Tolle says this will miraculously transform your entire life because that energy of resistance is what binds you.
Okay, that covers present suffering. But what about the massive weight of past pain? The trauma, the emotional baggage we all carry. This is where he introduces the concept of the pain body.
The pain body is the accumulation of every emotional pain you've ever experienced, grief, trauma, anger, that leaves a residue. This residue merges with past pain, including historical suffering and especially childhood pain, and it becomes a negative energy field lodged in your mind and your body. It's not just a memory, it's like an invisible, autonomous entity.
And it has a survival mechanism.
It does. It exists in two modes, dormant and active. When it's active, it rises up, it takes you over, you become intensely angry, violent, or deeply depressed, and it needs to feed. And crucially, it feeds exclusively on more pain.
Right. Anger, drama, violence, self-pity, even illness.
Exactly. Pain cannot feed on joy. It finds it indigestible.
Mhm.
When it takes you over, it will actively try to create a situation in your life that resonates with its own painful energy. It will provoke an argument or dredge up an old grievance just so it can feed.
So if I find myself doom scrolling on my phone, or I'm suddenly consumed by this intense, irrational anger over something tiny, that's likely the pain body taking the wheel. How do we starve this thing?
The pain body is deeply afraid of consciousness. It's terrified of being found out. The moment you observe it, feel its energy field within you, and consciously take your attention into it, into the raw feeling, not the story it's telling you, the identification is broken. This infusion of presence is a higher dimension of consciousness, and it means the pain body can no longer use you or replenish itself. Watching implies accepting it as part of what is in that moment without judging it. You just hold the space for that energy to be there.
That feels incredibly powerful, especially because Tolle dedicates a whole segment specifically to women and their relationship with this accumulated suffering.
He does. He notes that women generally find it easier to feel and be in their body, which makes them naturally closer to being. But the shadow side of that is the collective female pain body, this immense, accumulated historical pain of subjugation and violence. He says this often awakens powerfully, particularly right before the menstrual flow or during other hormonal shifts.
So how can that time be transmuted into a spiritual practice?
That time, which is often traditionally one of unconsciousness and suffering, can be completely transmuted. If a woman is able to stay intensely alert and present, just watching whatever intense feelings she has inside, the emotional surge, the anger, the depression, rather than being taken over by it, then a rapid transmutation of all past pain becomes possible. It involves focusing your attention just on the feeling, knowing it is the pain body, and accepting it without thinking, judging, or analyzing. It's the act of becoming the silent watcher of that immense historical energy.
If the pain body is accumulated suffering, let's look at the foundational emotion that dominates the unconscious state. Fear. It feels like the constant hum of anxiety in modern life.
Yeah.
How do we distinguish between, healthy, rational caution and this destructive psychological fear?
That distinction is vital. Avoiding fire because you know it'll burn you is just intelligence. It's common sense. It's a direct response to a concrete, immediate danger. But psychological fear is totally divorced from immediate reality. It comes in many forms: unease, worry, anxiety, dread. But it's always of something that might happen, something in the future.
This is that anxiety gap you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. You are physically here and now, safe in this room, but your mind is running scenarios 5 years down the road. If you are mind identified, this anxiety gap becomes your constant companion. The brutal truth is that you can always cope with the present moment, no matter how difficult it is. But you can't cope with something that is only a mind projection. You can't cope with the future.
And since the ego is this vulnerable, insecure, false self made from thought, its constant underlying message to the body is, danger, I'm under threat. The inevitable emotion is fear.
And ultimately, all psychological fear is the ego's fear of death, of annihilation. This is why even seemingly trivial situations can trigger such an intense emotional response. Think about the compulsive need to be absolutely right in an argument, maybe about some minor political point. If you identify with that mental position, being proven wrong threatens your mind-based sense of self with annihilation. The ego cannot afford to be wrong because to be wrong is to die.
That changes the entire perception of political debate, doesn't it? It's not just about policy. It's about defending a fictitious identity at any cost.
And that's why Tolle calls the compulsive need to be right a form of violence. The moment you disidentify from your mind by witnessing that compulsive need to defend your position, the right-wrong aspect becomes irrelevant to your true sense of self. You realize you are not the opinion. You are the awareness of the opinion. Defensiveness in any form is defending an illusion. True power is internal, rooted in being, and available only now. Anyone disconnected from that lives in fear.
This fear, then, seems to be what fuels the ego's constant, desperate search for wholeness, that deep-seated feeling of lack or incompleteness.
It's the bottomless hole. This lack is felt either as an intense sense of unworthiness, I'm not enough, or as an insatiable craving, I must have more. To fill this hole, people compulsively pursue possessions, success, power, or collective identifications like nationalistic pride, religious fervor, political tribes.
And the hole is always bottomless, because the ego can't be satisfied by external forms.
The fulfillment is always temporary, and soon they find the hole is still there, often even larger because the next craving becomes even more desperate. This is why Tolle offers such a potent perspective. All these external identifications must be relinquished if you want to find lasting peace.
That seems terrifying to the ego, though, to relinquish your history, possessions, beliefs.
It is the ultimate letting go. The secret of life, he says, is to die before you die. By recognizing that none of those forms, your job title, your memories, your political party, your net worth, are your true self, you realize that for your consciousness, there is no death. All those things that make up your ego are things you have to give up sooner or later anyway, at the latest when physical death comes. The more you let go now, the lighter and freer you become.
And it's fascinating that the ego loves to attach itself to problems. It sounds so counterintuitive that a self-preservation mechanism would want pain.
The ego often makes a person's sense of self intimately connected with their suffering. Think of the person whose entire identity is, I am the victim of X, or I am the one who suffered through Y. That narrative gives the ego a shape, a history, a perceived importance. Because their self-image is built around their suffering, the last thing many people want is to be free of their problems, because that means the loss of self, the loss of their primary story.
That is a powerful challenge for you, the listener. How do we confront the idea that we might subconsciously be attached to our own suffering?
Recognizing the root of this as identification with the mind allows you to step out of it. You just become present. The mind is a wonderful tool when you use it, but the dysfunction sets in when you mistake it for who you are. The key is simply awareness. You observe the story the ego is telling, and you hold that story in the light of consciousness, knowing the story is running, but it is not me.
You've mentioned this idea of the mind as a destructive monster a few times. Let's circle back to that. Tolle frames this entire teaching as a quantum leap in consciousness, an evolutionary imperative. Why is the urgency so critical right now?
Because the sheer complexity and technological reach of the human mind have exponentially increased the stakes. The mind patterns that caused tribal conflict eons ago are now armed with nuclear weapons and the ability to destroy the planetary environment. The mind has become so powerful that it threatens to destroy its host humanity. Breaking these patterns that cause endless violence and destruction is, according to Tolle, our only chance of survival as a race. It is an urgent call to evolution.
And if we manage to step into this state of liberation, what's the internal measurable sign that tells us we're on the right track?
The criterion is joy, ease, and lightness in what you are doing. It's not about achieving external success, but the internal condition while you're doing it. The how of the action is always more important than the what. When your sense of self comes from being, that psychological need to become anything other than who you already are just dissolves. Goals are then pursued with a playful, joyous energy, free from the fear and grim determination of the egoic drive. If you act from being, he asks, how can you not succeed? You have succeeded already because the joy is in the action, not the result.
So far, the path to prison seems deeply psychological, watching the mind, identifying the ego. But Tolle suggests that our very physical form, our body, is actually the most accessible key, a crucial portal to being.
Yes, and this is another really radical aspect of his teaching. The visible, touchable body is just an outer shell, a limited perception. The inner body is the invisible energy field, what many cultures call chi or prana, that gives life to the physical body. It's the animating presence within you. To inhabit the body is simply to feel the body from within, continuously, knowing that your true reality is this pulsing, living field of energy beyond the limited form. This reclaims consciousness from the mind and anchors you instantly in the now.
I understand the importance of grounding, but this runs totally counter to so many historical spiritual approaches. I mean, throughout history, many traditions emphasize body denial, self-flagellation, or severe asceticism to get to some kind of spiritual purity.
It is a complete reversal of that. Toll notes that very few seekers ever became finders by fighting or leaving the body. True transformation is through the body, not away from it. The inner body is the doorway into what he calls the unmanifested. He gives a sermon on the body, which basically states that although the physical structure is a symbol of impermanence, it will decay, and past concealed within that symbol is the splendor of your essential, immortal reality. By focusing your attention inward, you realize the inner body is your immediate link with the unmanifested.
And what are the immediate, tangible benefits beyond just spiritual realization of connecting with this inner body?
Well, one of the most fascinating benefits is physical. The slowing down of the aging process, the accumulation of psychological time, that continuous mental burden of past and future, it greatly impairs the cell's capacity for self-renewal. When you're identified more with the timeless inner body than the outer form, you don't accumulate time in your psyche, and so the outer body ages at a much slower rate.
And it also seems to act as a kind of internal force field against illness and external negativity.
Absolutely. It strengthens the immune system dramatically. The more consciousness you bring into the body, the stronger the immune system becomes. Tolle says it's as if every cell awakens and rejoices, feeling the master's presence. Most illnesses creep in when you are not present in the body, as if, the master is absent from the house. And your psychic immune system is enhanced too. You gain protection from the negative mental emotional fields of others, not by shielding yourself, but just by raising the frequency vibration of your total energy field so that lower frequencies like fear or anger just pass right through you.
This sounds like an incredibly powerful practice. Tolle details a specific self-healing meditation technique, doesn't he?
He does, and it's accessible anywhere. You close your eyes, lie flat if you can, and just focus your attention briefly on different parts of your body. Hands, feet, stomach, chest, staying on each for about 15 seconds. Then you run your attention like a slow, deliberate wave through your entire body, from feet to head and back, for about a minute. The final and most powerful step is to feel the inner body in its totality, as a single, vibrant field of energy for a few minutes, being intensely present in every cell. This anchoring of consciousness in your physical form is the ultimate antidote to the compulsive mind.
Going even deeper than the inner body, Tolle defines the ultimate source as the unmanifested. If the inner body is chi, the bridge, what exactly is the unmanifested?
Think of the unmanifested as the source like the raw data stream before it gets processed into specific forms or images. It's life in its undifferentiated state before it fragments into multiplicity. It's a realm of profound stillness, peace, joy, and intense aliveness. Chi, the inner energy field, that's the bridge. It's the movement, the river of energy. The unmanifested is the still, deep ocean from which that river flows. A deep focus on the inner body traces that river of chi right back to its source, the point of absolute stillness.
The inner body is the main portal, but Tolle argues that access to the timeless is literally everywhere around us in our daily sensory reality. He points to silence and space.
Indeed. For silence, the realization is that every sound, no matter how loud or chaotic, is born out of silence and returns to it. If you shift your focus and you listen not just to the sound, but to the silence that makes the sound possible, or you pay attention to the tiny gaps between words in a conversation, you create inner stillness. A portal opens. Silence is the unmanifested pervading the manifested world of sound.
And space seems even more vast and subtle.
The unmanifested pervades the entire physical universe as space, the emptiness that allows form to exist. And science confirms this. The physical world is nearly 100% empty space. This is the profound truth echoed by that ancient Buddhist teaching. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. By focusing your attention on the empty space around you, the gap between objects, the space above your head, you withdraw your attention from mind objects like thoughts and emotions, because you can't think and be intensely aware of space at the same time. This leads you directly to the space of no mind or pure consciousness.
This shift in focus from the inner world now leads us right to our interactions. Tolle dedicates a lot of time to relationships, noting that for many, they are the biggest source of suffering, but also the biggest catalyst for realization.
Without presence, all intimate relationships are deeply flawed. They're dysfunctional. They're marked by this continuous oscillation between pleasure and pain, which manifests as that common love-hate dynamic. The initial in-love phase is intensely satisfying because it temporarily addresses the ego's fear and sense of lack. You feel whole, you feel needed, validated, but that intensity contains this immense neediness and clinging. It operates like a drug. It's an addiction.
And we all know what happens when an addiction isn't fed.
When the partner inevitably fails to meet the ego's unrealistic, bottomless needs, which they always will, the underlying fear, pain, and lack that the ego was hiding just resurface. And that pain is then instantly projected outward as attack, hostility, criticism, or emotional violence. Seeking salvation in form in the partner is futile because the feelings of lack and fear that are intrinsic to the ego were only covered up, they weren't dissolved.
So how do you move from this addictive, flawed state to what Tolle calls an enlightened relationship?
Love can only flourish if your presence is strong enough to ensure that neither the reactive thinker nor the pain body takes over the dynamic. The greatest catalyst for transformation is the complete radical acceptance of your partner exactly as they are, without trying to judge them, label them, or change them. This act of non-resistance ends all the ego games, the addiction, and the codependency.
This transforms the entire purpose of the relationship. It becomes a spiritual practice, a sadhana.
Correct. The core acceptance is that the relationship is here to make you conscious instead of just happy. When disharmony inevitably arises, a flash of anger, a surge of jealousy, defensiveness, you must hold the knowing of that moment. This knowing is your awareness. It creates a still, spacious presence that surrounds the non-peace, embracing it and thereby transmuting that painful energy into peace. You stop reacting to the drama and you start witnessing it.
So if my partner leaves their socks on the floor, and my mind insists on judging them and starting an argument about respect, the ego has been triggered. What does holding the knowing look like in that specific moment?
It looks like this. Instead of immediately speaking or reacting, you feel that contraction in your chest, the irritation, that little surge of anger. You recognize that physical feeling as the active pain body or the judgmental ego. You take your attention into that contraction. You don't try to label it or tell yourself the story of how wrong your partner is. You simply observe the pure energy of the feeling. That space you create between the trigger and the reaction, the witnessing, is the transmutation of the anger. You can still decide to pick up the socks later, but the action is taken from clarity, not unconscious compulsion.
You mentioned earlier that Tolle suggests women generally are closer to this path of being. Can you elaborate on why that connection to the body is considered such a powerful advantage?
Tolle suggests that, generally, it's easier for a woman to feel and be in her body, which makes her naturally closer to being, and so closer to enlightenment. This deep connection to the formless is why, historically and mythologically, the divine source, the mother of the universe, the creator of life, was often seen as female. Women are closer to the unmanifested because they are intrinsically tied to the manifested process of creation.
But this closeness also means they bear the weight of the collective female pain body.
Precisely. This accumulated pain suffered by women throughout history due to subjugation and violence is a major obstacle. It often awakens powerfully, particularly before the menstrual flow. By understanding this pain is not her identity, but trapped life energy, and by facing it with intense, sustained presence during those difficult times, a woman can transmute it. This conscious suffering transforms the pain into radiant consciousness, ultimately fulfilling the female role as a bridge between the manifested world and the unmanifested source.
This level of transformation requires the deepest wisdom, which Tolle defines as surrender. That word, as we said, so often feels like apathy, resignation, or defeat.
True surrender is the opposite of resignation. It is the most profound wisdom available. It is the simple, powerful act of yielding to the flow of life, accepting the present moment unconditionally, and relinquishing that inner resistance to what is. Inner resistance is the mind screaming no to the now. Surrender is saying an inner yes.
But if a situation is genuinely abusive or oppressive or intolerable, do we just accept it?
Surrender is a purely inner phenomena focused only on this tiny segment called the now. It is entirely compatible with outer action. Surrendered action, which is infused with being, flows from this acceptance and it results in clarity, joy, and effectiveness. If you find your situation intolerable, Tolle gives you 3 immediate options that require action, not passivity. Remove yourself, change it, or accept it totally. Don't just sit there and pollute your inner space with negativity and resistance. You must choose now, accept the consequences, and move.
Surrender and presence also redefine fulfillment, bringing us to the concept of true prosperity. We so often associate prosperity with future financial success.
True prosperity is gratitude for the present moment and the fullness of life now. It cannot possibly come in the future. If you are dissatisfied with what you have now, if you're always waiting for the next goal, the next purchase, the next achievement, even if you make millions, you will continue to experience the inner condition of lack. You won't be abiding in being and feeling the fullness of life, which is always available right now.
So the biggest illusion is just waiting for happiness.
Waiting is a state of mind that says, I don't have enough now. I will be whole later. We are urged to give up waiting as a state of mind. When you are fully present, there is never any need to wait for anything. The famous example Tolle gives, if someone apologizes, sorry to have kept you waiting, you can answer with inner peace. That's all right. I wasn't waiting. I was just standing here enjoying myself, enjoying myself. The state of waiting is canceled out by the fullness of the moment.
This leads back to the final, most fundamental realization about our relationship with suffering, the power to choose. Why do people repeatedly fall into dysfunctional patterns even when they know better?
They do so because the conditioned mind seeks to recreate what is familiar, the known, even if the known is painful. When people are caught in these patterns, they lack consciousness and therefore they have no choice. This isn't a moral judgment, it's a statement about the state of awareness. This is why Jesus said, forgive them, for they know not what they do. They literally do not know the mechanism that's driving their actions.
So choice begins the moment you disidentify from the mind.
Absolutely. Nobody chooses dysfunction or insanity or continuous suffering. They happen because there isn't enough presence, not enough light, to dispel the darkness of the unconscious patterns. The conditioned mind is running the life, and until you become present, you're not fully here. You haven't woken up yet. The moment you introduce awareness, the compulsion to repeat the past dissolves. To summarize the essential insights for you, the mind is a survival machine. It's adept at attack and defense, but it is fundamentally not your true self. Identification with the mind creates the ego, a phantom self that's rooted entirely in fear. This attachment forces us to live almost exclusively in psychological time. That obsession with the past and future, which is the source of nearly all human suffering, both personal and collective. The radical solution is intense, non-judgmental presence, and it's accessed through simple methods like becoming the silent watcher of your thoughts and emotions, and by anchoring your consciousness in the vibrant, living energy field of your inner body.
And the goal here is not merely an occasional spiritual experience, but a permanent, profound shift in consciousness. Being present as the watcher, the observer, the awareness itself, the immense energy that is compulsively trapped in the endless repetitive activity of the mind is withdrawn and transmuted. It turns into presence, which is the frequency of being itself. It's in this state that fulfillment, peace, and true power reside, and it's accessible only now. So what does this all mean?
Tolle suggests that we are here at this critical evolutionary juncture to enable the divine purpose of the universe to unfold. If suffering or not acceptance of the now is what forces many humans into awakening, and only the present moment can free you of the past and the future, then consider this. How much more suffering do you believe you need before you are ready to make the radical choice to relinquish your need for time? Because, as we've discussed, time and pain are inseparable.